Captain Velther stood on the bridge of his warship and watched the scanner screens with cold satisfaction in his 4 eyes. The primitive human cargo vessel hung in space ahead like a wounded animal waiting for the kill. Its engines were silent and its hull showed signs of age and poor maintenance. This would be easy work for his crew. The Krillian Empire had been traveling the stars for 3,000 years. While humans had barely left their home system, Velther had 40 years of military service and had boarded hundreds of vessels during his long career. He knew every trick that desperate crews tried when faced with superior force. None of them ever worked against Krillian precision and discipline. "Sir, the vessel is carrying medical supplies according to our scans," his tactical officer reported from her station. 12 life signs detected, all human, no weapon signatures. Velther made a dismissive gesture with one of his forearms. Humans were new to the galactic community and clearly did not understand how things worked out here in the contested zones. This cargo ship had crossed into space that the Krillian Empire claimed as their own. The humans would learn respect through this encounter, or they would learn nothing at all. "Prepare boarding parties," Velther commanded. "I want this done by standard protocol. Cut through their cargo bay door and secure the crew. If they resist, then stun them, but I want prisoners to question about human expansion plans." The boarding teams assembled in the launch bay with practiced efficiency. 20 elite soldiers in full combat armor carrying plasma rifles and shock batons. They had trained for situations exactly like this one for years. Each Krillian warrior was worth 10 lesser species in combat ability, and these were the best of the best. Breach pods launched from the warship and crossed the dark space between the 2 vessels in seconds. Magnetic clamps seized the human cargo ship's hull, with metallic shrieks that echoed through both vessels. Plasma cutters began their work on the reinforced doors, while the Krillian soldiers waited in formation inside. The human vessel, a man named Marcus Chun, watched the breach in progress on a handheld screen and spoke quietly into his comm unit. "They're coming through the cargo bay just like we thought. Everyone to your positions and remember what we practiced." Marcus was 56 years old with gray in his hair and scars on his hands from a lifetime of work. He had served in Earth's Marine Corps 20 years ago before becoming a cargo hauler. The rest of his crew were just ordinary people trying to make a living among the stars. 2 mechanics named Sarah and Tommy who kept the old ship running. A pilot called Rivera who could fly anything with engines. And 8 others who loaded cargo and maintained systems, but Marcus had taught them all something during the long voyages between stations. He had taught them that a ship was not just a vehicle. It was territory, and humans knew how to defend their territory better than any species in the galaxy. Even if they did not know it yet, the plasma cutters finished their work and the cargo bay door fell inward with a crash that shook the deck plating. Krillian soldiers poured through the opening in perfect formation, with weapons raised and scanners sweeping for targets. The cargo bay appeared empty, except for containers of medical supplies stacked floor to ceiling. "Spread out and search," the team leader ordered. "Humans are fragile and will hide rather than fight. Find them quickly." That was when everything went wrong for the Krillians in ways their training had never prepared them for. The lights in the cargo bay suddenly cut out, leaving only emergency lighting that cast strange shadows everywhere. The temperature began dropping rapidly as someone vented the heat into space. Gravity flickered and changed, making the soldiers stumble and fight for balance. Sarah triggered the trap from her hiding spot in a maintenance tunnel above the cargo bay. She had rigged the medical cryo-storage units to release all their coolant at once. Super cold gas flooded across the deck and flash froze everything it touched. 3 Krillian soldiers went down immediately as their armor systems failed in the extreme cold. The Krillians tried to fall back toward the breach point, but Marcus and Tommy had been busy during the cutting operation. They had stacked cargo containers to create a maze where the clear path used to be. The soldiers found themselves channeled into narrow corridors where their numerical advantage meant nothing. Rivera cut the gravity completely, and suddenly the Krillians were floating helplessly in zero-G, while the humans moved through their own ship with the ease of practice. Marcus had made his crew train for this exact situation dozens of times during the voyage. They knew every handhold and every surface to push off from the ventilation shafts and from behind false panels. The humans struck with improvised weapons that should not have worked but did. Surgical lasers from the medical supplies cut through armor at close range. Pneumatic tools designed for hull repair became projectile weapons in zero gravity. Even the fire suppression system became a weapon when Tommy flooded a section with foam that blinded the Krillian soldiers and clogged their breathing. Filters. The Krillian team leader tried to coordinate his soldiers, but the humans had hacked into their communication frequencies and were broadcasting false orders and screaming sounds and music that made tactical coordination impossible. His soldiers were scattered through the cargo ship fighting individual battles in the dark and cold against enemies they could not see. Clearly, one by one, the Krillian soldiers felt a stun. Weapons and improvised traps and sheer desperate human ingenuity. They had expected frightened cargo haulers and instead found themselves fighting ghosts who knew every centimeter of their territory and used everything as a weapon. Back on the warship, Captain Velthor watched in growing horror as the vital signs of his boarding party flickered and went dark on his screens. Send reinforcements immediately, he ordered. Double the team size and equip them with heavy combat gear. But before the second wave could launch, a message came through on the communication channels. Marcus Chun's voice was calm and steady despite the violence that had just ended. Krillian vessel, this is the cargo ship Steady Hand. Your soldiers are alive but unconscious and restrained. You can retrieve them if you back off right now and leave us alone. If you send more troops, we will defend ourselves again, and next time, we might not be so careful about keeping your people alive. This is our ship and our space. You had no right to attack us. Take your people and go. Velthor stared at the communication panel in disbelief. A crew of 12 humans with no military vessel and no proper weapons had defeated 20 of his best soldiers. It was impossible, and yet it had happened. His pride demanded that he continue the attack, but his common sense told him that something was very wrong here. He authorized the retrieval of his soldiers and watched as the humans actually kept their word and released them. The Krillian warriors returned to the warship in shame with tales of fighting enemies who appeared from nowhere and used the ship itself as a weapon against them. As the Krillian warship retreated, Captain Velthor began writing his report with shaking hands. He would mark this encounter as classified, but he knew the story would spread. Other species would hear about this and wonder what it meant. Marcus Chun stood in the cargo bay of his ship and looked at his crew with pride. They were tired and scared, but they had defended their home together. Let's get these systems back online and continue to the station, he said. We have medical supplies to deliver and people who need them. The crew got to work, but they all knew something had changed. They had sent a message to the galaxy, whether they meant to or not. Humans might be new to space and might have primitive ships, but when you came onto their vessels uninvited, you were entering their territory, and humans had millions of years of evolution teaching them how to defend territory against bigger and stronger predators. The Krillians had just learned that lesson the hard way. They would not be the last. Dr. Theradon reviewed the report from Captain Velthor for the 7th time and still could not make sense of what she was reading. As a xenopsychologist for the Galactic Council, she had studied hundreds of species and understood their behaviors and motivations. But these humans were proving to be something entirely different from what she expected. The Luminari were a peaceful species who had never fought a war in their 12,000-year history. Violence made no sense to Therodon on an intellectual level, though she understood it as a concept that other species engaged in. But what happened on that human cargo ship was not just violence. It was something far more disturbing. She pulled up 17 other incident reports that had come across her desk in the past 2 months. Each one told a similar story with minor variations. Corellian soldiers defeated by human miners. Zur warriors driven back by human colonists. Renthi security forces stunned by human traders. The pattern was undeniable, even though it should have been impossible. These were not military encounters between trained armies. These were boarding actions against civilian vessels that somehow ended with the civilians winning against overwhelming force. Therodon had seen combat analysis from a dozen different species, and none of them showed anything like this. Something about humans was fundamentally different. She began her research by accessing the human data files that the Council had collected since first contact 3 years ago. Humans had been eager to share information about themselves and had uploaded their entire historical and cultural database to the Galactic Network. Therodon started reading through military history, expecting to find evidence of a warrior culture. What she found was so much worse than that. Humans did not have a warrior culture. They had thousands of warrior cultures that had developed independently on their home world. Every continent and every major civilization had created its own fighting styles and tactics and weapons. They had been fighting each other for their entire history. The Luminari had avoided war through philosophy and mutual understanding. Most galactic species had a few conflicts in their past before achieving peace, but humans had never stopped fighting. Their history was an endless cycle of conflicts that ranged from small raids to global wars involving hundreds of millions of soldiers. Therodon felt her bioluminescent skin flickering with distress as she read about trench warfare. Humans had fought battles where soldiers lived in holes in the ground for years, defending tiny strips of land with their lives. They had developed entire tactical doctrines about fighting in confined underground spaces where retreat was impossible. She read about submarine warfare next, and her distress grew stronger. Humans had built vessels that traveled underwater and fought other submarines in pitch darkness, using only sounds to locate their enemies. They had spent decades perfecting the art of combat in tiny metal tubes deep beneath the ocean, where any mistake meant drowning. Urban warfare made even less sense to her peaceful mind. Humans had fought building to building and room to room in their cities. They had words in dozens of languages for fighting inside structures. They had tactics for defending stairwells and corridors and individual rooms. This was knowledge that other species had never needed to develop. The research continued through naval boarding actions and castle sieges and tunnel fighting. Everywhere Therodon looked, she found evidence that humans had been training for shipboard combat for thousands of years, without even knowing that spaceships would exist someday. They had evolved techniques for fighting in confined spaces, simply because that was how wars were fought on their crowded world. But the evolutionary data was even more disturbing than the historical records. Therodon accessed the biological files and learned that humans had evolved as persistence hunters on a death world. Their planet had extreme temperature variations and dangerous predators and environmental hazards that would kill most galactic species. Humans had survived by being able to track and chase prey over long distances. They had developed exceptional spatial awareness and pattern recognition, because missing a sign or losing track of their target meant starvation. Their brains were built to understand three-dimensional spaces and remember complex paths through territory. The psychological profile was the final piece of the puzzle that made everything clear to Therodon. Humans had something called fight-or-flight response that triggered when they felt threatened. Most species had only the flight part and would flee from danger when possible. But humans had both options hardwired into their biology. When trapped in a confined space where flight was not possible, the human brain automatically shifted to fight mode. Their bodies released chemicals that increased strength and reduced pain and sharpened focus. They became more dangerous when cornered, rather than less dangerous like most species. This was the opposite of how evolution should work. Therodon started watching human entertainment media next to understand their culture better. What she found horrified her more than anything else in her research. Humans created fictional stories about fighting in confined spaces for fun. They had entire genres of entertainment devoted to spaceship combat and building raids and tunnel fighting. One movie showed humans fighting aliens on a spaceship, where the heroes used the ventilation system and the ship's systems as weapons. Another showed soldiers defending a building floor by floor against overwhelming odds. A third showed submarine crews hunting each other in the ocean depths. These were not training materials. These were stories that humans told themselves for enjoyment. Children's games were even more revealing. Human young played hide and seek in confined spaces. They played capture the flag in buildings and forests. They played laser tag in dark arenas. Every human child grew up practicing the exact skills needed for shipboard combat without even knowing why. The Radin compiled all her research into a report that took 3 days to write. She tried to be objective and clinical, but her conclusion was stark and undeniable. Humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy when fighting in confined spaces. Not because they were stronger or faster or more advanced, but because they were purpose-built for exactly that type of combat. Their evolution had given them the tools. Their history had given them the knowledge. Their psychology made them fierce when cornered. Their culture celebrated confined space combat as entertainment. And they had millions of years of genetic memory that activated when they defended their territory. The report ended with a warning that Therodon knew would change how the Galactic Council viewed humanity forever. Boarding a human vessel is not a military action against the crew. It is an invasion of territory against a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to defend territory against larger and stronger enemies. In the confined spaces of a starship, we are the aliens trying to fight in an environment we do not understand. But there at home, she sent the report to the Council Military Analysis Division and sat back in her chair feeling exhausted. The Luminari believed that all species could live in peace if they understood each other. But understanding humans meant recognizing that they were potentially the most dangerous species anyone had ever encountered. Not because they sought violence, but because they were so perfectly adapted to survive it. 3 days later, Therodon received a message from the Council requesting that she present her findings at an emergency military session. The incidents were increasing, and fleet commanders needed to understand what they were facing. She agreed to present, but knew that many species would not believe her until they learned the lesson themselves. Galaxy was going to learn that humans were different. They had come from a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had survived by becoming unkillable. Now they were spreading to the stars and bringing that survival instinct with them. Any species that tried to board a human ship was not engaging in combat. They were triggering millions of years of human evolution, and evolution always won in the end. Fleet Admiral Krax looked at the human colony ship on his display screens and felt nothing but contempt for the primitive vessel. The Zur Dominion had conquered 17 species with their military might, and these newcomers would learn to respect Zur superiority. The contested system belonged to the Dominion now, and the humans would submit or be destroyed. The Dreadnought Infinite Conquest was 10 kilometers of weapons and armor, crewed by 40,000 of the finest Zor warriors in the fleet. Admiral Krax had personally led the subjugation of 6 species during his career, and had never lost a battle. These humans would be no different from all the others who had learned to bow before Zur power. Target their engines only, Krax commanded from his throne on the bridge. I want them disabled but intact. We will take the colonists as slaves and use their ship as a trophy. 3,000 warriors for the boarding operation. Overwhelming force from the start. The Infinite Conquest fired precisely, and the human colony ship's engines exploded in silence. The vessel called New Hope tumbled in space, now powerless and helpless. Krax watched with satisfaction as his warriors loaded into breach pods and prepared to take what was rightfully his by conquest inside. The New Hope alarms were screaming, and emergency lighting had activated. Captain Jennifer Park stood on the bridge and assessed the situation with the calm that came from 16 years in Earth's military before she became a colony ship captain. 500 colonists were depending on her, and she would not let them become slaves. All security personnel to your stations. She spoke into the ship-wide comm. All colonists to the safe zones we prepared. Remember your training people. This is what we practiced for. The New Hope carried families and scientists and engineers who were traveling to establish a new colony world. They had children on board, and elderly people, and pregnant women. But they also had 50 former military personnel who had volunteered to protect the colonists. And Captain Park had made sure every single person on the ship knew basic emergency procedures. The Zor breach pods hit the colony ship's hull at 12 different points simultaneously. Plasma cutters burned through reinforced metal, and 3,000 warriors poured into the vessel expecting easy victory. They found empty corridors and sealed doors in silence. Spread out and search every section. The Zor commander ordered his troops. Humans are weak and will hide. Find them and bring them to the holding areas. Kill anyone who resists. The Zor moved through the ship in formation with weapons ready. Their armor was thick, and their strength was 3 times that of a human. They had fought on 100 worlds and won every time. But they had never fought humans before, and they did not understand what that meant. Lieutenant Marcus Webb watched the Zor advance from a hidden observation point and whispered into his comm. Sector 3 has 200 hostiles moving toward Junction 7. Springing Trap Alpha in 5 seconds. The trap was simple but effective. The engineering team had rigged the gravity generators to create localized fields that could be controlled manually. When the Zor warriors reached the junction, the gravity suddenly increased to 6 times normal. The warriors crashed to the deck under their own armor weight and could not stand. Up before they could adapt to bulkhead doors slammed shut and locked, trapping them in the high gravity zone. 200 Zor warriors were out of the fight without a single shot being fired. The rest of the boarding force heard their comrades calling for help over the comms and began to realize this would not be as easy as they thought. In Sector 5, a different trap awaited another group of Zor warriors. The environmental controls had been hacked by the human engineers, and when the warriors entered a cargo bay, the oxygen content suddenly dropped while the temperature spiked to 150 degrees. The Zor were tough, but their armor had limits, and they retreated in confusion. Captain Park watched the tactical display from the secure bridge and directed her people like pieces on a chessboard. Team 7 fall back to Checkpoint Delta, Team 3 advance and seal Section 9. Engineering cut power to decks 12 through 15. The New Hope was not a military vessel, but it was a colony ship designed to become a settlement when it reached its destination. It carried fabrication equipment and construction tools and mining gear, everything needed to build a new world. And all of that equipment was being turned into weapons. Dr. Sarah Chan was a civilian scientist specializing in geology, but she had also been Army combat engineer before going back to school. She stood in a fabrication bay with 6 other colonists, and they were building explosives from mining charges and construction materials. These go in the ventilation shafts at these coordinates, she explained. When the Zor come through, we blow the charges and collapse the sections. The Zor continued their advance, but found that every corridor was a potential death trap. The humans had prepared their ship like a fortress. Bulkhead doors would slam shut to separate Zor units. Gravity would flip orientation and send warriors tumbling into walls. Atmospheric pressure would drop suddenly, causing disorientation. In Section 8, a group of Zor found themselves fighting in total darkness after the humans cut all power. Human defenders wearing thermal goggles picked them off one by one using stun weapons they had improvised from ship equipment. The Zur had superior armor, but the humans had home field advantage. Admiral Krax watched from his dreadnought. As the casualties mounted, 1,200 warriors were down or trapped, and his forces had not even reached the civilian sections yet. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Why can our warriors not handle a simple boarding operation?" His tactical officer reported the grim reality. "Admiral, the humans have weaponized their entire ship. They are using environmental controls and structural systems against our forces. They are fighting with improvised weapons and using the ship's layout to nullify our numerical advantage. Our warriors cannot gain ground." Krax slammed his fist on his throne. "Send more troops. I want 5,000 warriors in that vessel. Crush them with overwhelming numbers." But the additional warriors only made things worse for the Zor. The colony ship's corridors were not designed for thousands of soldiers moving in formation. The Zir began crowding each other and blocking their own lines of fire. The humans used this against them with brutal efficiency. Captain Park authorized the use of the fire suppression systems as weapons. Entire sections flooded with flame-retardant foam that blinded the Zur and clogged their breathing filters. The warriors stumbled through white clouds, unable to see or breathe properly, while humans in breathing masks ambushed them from side passages in. The medbay Dr. James Torres was treating human casualties with the help of civilian volunteers. They had lost 83 people so far in the fighting. Each death weighed heavily on everyone, but they could not stop defending. "We hold, or we die," Torres said quietly. No other choice. The battle continued for 4 days that felt like years. The humans rotated their defenders and used hit-and-run tactics. They never held ground for long but fell back through prepared positions. Every section of the ship had traps and contingencies. The Zur advance was measured in meters paid for, with dozens of casualties. Psychological warfare was just as brutal as the physical fighting. The humans played sounds over the ship's speakers, screaming and laughter and recordings of Zur warriors dying. They hacked the enemy comms and broadcast false information. They made the Zur forces paranoid and jumpy. On the 5th day, Admiral Krax made the call that shamed him and his species. "All forces retreat. Abort the boarding operation. Return to the Infinite Conquest immediately." The Zur forces withdrew through the breaches they had made, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The humans had defended their ship at a cost of 83 lives against an enemy that lost over 1,200 warriors. The casualty ratio spoke for itself. Captain Park stood in the ruined cargo bay after the Jewel left and looked at her exhausted crew. They had won, but the victory felt hollow with so many dead. "Get me a damage report and casualty list," she ordered. "And someone find out if our comms are working. The galaxy needs to know what happened here." The recording of the battle was transmitted across Council space, and every military force watched in stunned silence. The Zor Dominion had been humiliated by civilians defending a colony ship. The implications were staggering. Admiral Krax filed his report and then retired in disgrace. He had learned what others would soon learn: that humans were dangerous not because of technology or training, but because they fought like cornered animals with intelligence and creativity, an absolute refusal to quit. The New Hope drifted in space, damaged but undefeated, a testament to what humans could do when defending their home. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council filled with representatives from 300 species as the emergency session was called to order. The massive circular room could hold thousands of delegates, and today every seat was occupied. The human question had become too urgent to ignore any longer. Council Speaker Marathon called for silence with a gesture of her crystalline appendages. The speakers were a species of living crystal who had served as neutral mediators for 5,000 years. This session addresses the increasing incidents involving human vessels and military boarding actions by various council member species. We must reach a consensus on how to proceed. The holographic displays throughout the chamber showed footage from the New Hope battle. Every delegate had seen the recordings, but watching them again in the full council chamber made the reality undeniable. 3,000 Zero warriors had been repelled by 500 colonists. The casualty ratios were unprecedented, and modern galactic warfare ambassador Velkron of the Krillian Empire stood to speak first. His forearms spread in a gesture of humility that was rare for his proud species. The Krillian Empire wishes to present formal evidence of 7 separate boarding actions against human vessels that resulted in the defeat or significant casualties among our forces. We initially believed these were isolated incidents, but the pattern is clear. He activated a tactical display that showed each engagement. Cargo ships and transport vessels and mining craft. None of them military, and none of them should have been able to defeat trained Krillian soldiers. In every case, the humans turned their vessels into fortresses. They used systems we considered non-threatening as weapons. They fought with a ferocity and creativity that our tactical models could not predict. Fleet Commander Jatok of the Zer Dominion spoke next, and his shame was visible in his posture. The Zer were warrior people who valued honor above all else, and what happened at New Hope had stained their honor. The Dominion acknowledges our defeat at the hands of human colonists. We sent overwhelming force and were repelled with heavy casualties. This cannot be attributed to luck or circumstance. The humans fought as if every corridor was sacred ground. Jatak continued. They sacrificed themselves to defend positions that had no strategic value. They refused to surrender, even when facing impossible odds. This behavior does not match any species profile we have encountered. Dr. Therodon stood to present her research findings. The luminescent Luminari looked small and fragile compared to the warrior species surrounding her, but her voice carried authority. Honored delegates, I have compiled extensive research on human psychology and evolutionary history. What we face is not a military problem, but a biological and cultural reality. The displays changed to show Earth's history, and the assembled delegates watched in growing unease. Trench warfare and submarine combat and urban fighting. Thousands of years of humans perfecting the art of confined space combat. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a death world, Therodon explained. Their planet tried to kill them constantly, and they survived by becoming unkillable. She showed brain scans comparing human neural patterns to other species during stress situations. When cornered in a confined space, the human brain activates ancient survival programming. They become more dangerous when trapped rather than less dangerous. Their fight-or-flight response is weighted heavily toward fighting when flight is impossible. Ambassador Kulvar of the Renthi Federation requested permission to speak. The Renthi had maintained peaceful contact with humanity since first contact and understood them better than most. I have lived among humans for 2 years and can offer perspective on their nature. They are not a warlike species in the way the Zhur are warlike. They do not seek conflict or glory in battle. But humans have a concept they call home. Kavar continued, and to them, every ship is home. When you board a human vessel, you are not engaging in military action. You are invading their home. And humans have millions of years of genetic programming that says you defend your home at any cost. The debate intensified as various species offered their perspectives. The militant Korthok argued for developing new boarding tactics specifically designed to counter human advantages. The diplomatic Serini advocated for treating humans as equals and avoiding confrontation. Entirely Trade Minister Furan raised an economic concern. If we cannot board human vessels, then we cannot enforce trade regulations or inspect cargo or pursue criminals who flee to human ships. They will become havens for smugglers and outlaws. Qua responded immediately. That assumes humans will protect criminals. My experience shows they follow laws and cooperate with legitimate authorities. The issue is not enforcement but method. Ask a human captain for permission to inspect and they will cooperate. Try to force your way aboard and they will defend their home. Military analyst Creven presented tactical data that made the delegates uncomfortable. Based on recorded engagements, the expected casualty ratio for boarding a human vessel is 8-to-1 in favor of the defending humans. This ratio holds regardless of whether the humans are military or civilian, male or female, young or old. They all fight with equal effectiveness in shipboard combat. The humans do not just use weapons. Creven continued. They weaponize everything. Life support systems become weapons, gravity becomes a weapon. The ship structure itself becomes a weapon. They have a phrase that applies here: improvise, adapt, overcome. They never stop finding new ways to fight. Chancellor drove in of the Mechanus. Collective offered a synthetic species perspective. My people do not understand emotion, but we understand efficiency. Boarding human vessels is statistically inadvisable. The risk-to-reward ratio is unacceptable. We should simply acknowledge this reality and adjust our protocols. The debate continued for hours with no consensus emerging. Some species wanted to develop countermeasures and continue boarding operations. Others advocated for treating human vessels as inviolate territory. The council was divided between pride and pragmatism. Finally, council speaker Marathon called for a vote on a specific proposal. The Military Analysis Division has drafted a formal advisory that would warn all council forces against attempting boarding operations on human vessels. This advisory would be distributed to all military commands and entered into official tactical doctrine. Those in favor indicate now. The vote was close, but the advisory passed. Too many species had experienced defeats at human hands, and too many more had watched the recordings and recognized the danger. Pride demanded they continue trying, but survival instinct demanded they adapt. Ambassador Velcron stood again to address a final concern. What happens when humans become aggressive? If they are so dangerous in shipboard combat, what prevents them from using this advantage to attack us? We may be creating our own worst enemy. Kovar answered with certainty. Humans do not seek conquest. They seek security. They fight ferociously when defending, but show restraint when attacking. In 2 years of contact, I have never seen humans initiate violence. They respond to violence, but they do not start it. The warning we issue today is not about human aggression, Kor concluded. It is about our own survival. We are telling our militaries that boarding a human ship is suicide. Not because humans want to kill us, but because they will defend their homes with everything they have. The only winning move is not to play this game. The session ended with the advisory approved for immediate distribution. Within days, every military force in council space would receive the warning. Some would heed it, and some would learn the hard way as the delegates filed out of the Grand Chamber. Many were troubled by what the vote represented. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council had officially acknowledged that a species was superior in a specific domain of warfare. Humans owned shipboard combat the way the Krillians owned space superiority, and the Zor owned ground warfare. Dr. Theradon remained in her seat long after the chamber emptied. She had helped prevent future bloodshed with her research, but she wondered what the long-term implications would be. Humans were spreading through the galaxy, and now everyone knew they were dangerous when cornered. Galaxy was going to have to learn to coexist with a species that could not be conquered on their own ships. Diplomacy would replace boarding actions. Negotiation would replace force. Perhaps that was better for everyone, but Theradon could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something larger. Humans had not sought this reputation, but now they had it. And reputation shaped reality in galactic politics. The official document appeared on every military communication network in Council space simultaneously. Official Military Advisory 7734 was written in 17 languages and formatted according to each species' preferred style. But the message was identical across all versions, and implications were staggering. Section 7 of the advisory contained the critical warning that would change galactic warfare forever. Under no circumstances should Council military vessels attempt to board, seize, or conduct interior operations aboard human-crewed spacecraft. Human performance in confined space combat scenarios exceeds all established tactical models by a factor of 12.7. Expected casualty ratios for boarding actions favor defending humans at rates of 8-to-1 to 15-to-1, even when attackers possess superior technology and numbers. The document continued with detailed analysis and recommendations. Avoid confrontation with human vessels when possible. If confrontation is necessary, use standoff weapons and never attempt boarding. Treat all human ships as if they are military vessels regardless of their designation. Assume every human crew member is combat-capable fleet. Commanders across the galaxy read the advisory with reactions ranging from relief to outrage. Some species saw it as practical survival guidance, while others viewed it as a humiliating admission of weakness. But none could deny the evidence that supported the warning on Earth. The news reached United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva and sparked an emergency cabinet meeting. President Chun stood before the assembled ministers and projected calm despite the chaos of opinions filling the room. We need to address this carefully. The galaxy now sees us as dangerous, and we must manage that perception. We did not seek this reputation, Defense Minister Rodriguez pointed out. Our people defended themselves against illegal boarding actions. We have every right to protect our vessels. Rights and perceptions are different things. Foreign Minister Okoro responded. Some species will respect this warning and leave us alone. Others will see it as a challenge to their honor. We need to prepare for both outcomes. President Chun made her decision and scheduled an address to Earth's population and the broader galactic community. The speech would be broadcast across all communication networks and translated into every council language. Humanity needed to present a unified message about who they were and what they wanted to. Days later, President Chun stood before cameras in the assembly hall and spoke to billions of listeners across hundreds of worlds. People of Earth and members of the Galactic Council, I address you today regarding the recent advisory issued by the Council Military Analysis Division. The advisory warns against boarding human vessels and cites our effectiveness in confined space combat. Chun continued, some have interpreted this as evidence that humans are aggressive or warlike. I want to clarify our position on this matter. We are not a warlike species, the President stated firmly. We do not seek conflict, and we extend our hand in friendship to all species who approach us in peace. But we are a species that remembers our history. We have been invaded and conquered and subjugated by our own kind for thousands of years. We learned those lessons in blood. Chun's voice carried both warning and invitation. Our ships are our homes. When you board a human vessel without permission, you are not engaging in military action. You are invading our home. And we will defend our homes with everything we have. This is not aggression. This is survival instinct hardwired into our species over millions of years. But we want you to understand something important. She continued, we hope for peace and cooperation with all Council species. We welcome legitimate inspections conducted with permission. We will cooperate with lawful authorities who approach us with respect. What we will not tolerate is forced boarding by hostile forces. The President concluded with words that would be quoted across the galaxy. The Council's warning is not a threat from us. It is their recognition of a simple truth. Our ships are not your hunting grounds. They are a territory. Approach us with friendship, and we will respond with friendship. Approach us with hostility, and you will learn why evolution favored humans who could defend their homes." The speech was analyzed by every council intelligence agency, and most concluded that humans were being honest about their intentions. They were not planning aggression, but they would defend themselves with brutal efficiency if attacked. The smart move was to respect their boundaries. Captain Velther watched the president's speech from his retirement home on the Krillian homeworld and felt vindicated. He had been the first to report on human combat effectiveness and had been mocked by some in the military hierarchy. Now everyone understood what he had tried to tell them. Humans were different. He received a message from the Krillian Military Academy requesting that he consult on new training programs. They wanted to teach officers how to avoid boardings entirely and how to recognize when humans were defending territory versus when they were open to negotiation. Velther accepted because preventing future bloodshed was worth his time. Fleet Admiral Krax of the Zur Dominion had a very different reaction to the advisory and the president's speech. He saw both as insults to Zur honor that demanded response. The Dominion could not be seen as weak or afraid of any species, no matter how dangerous they were in specific circumstance. Krax began planning a new assault on human targets, but this time he would do it properly. No boarding actions and no close combat. He would use overwhelming firepower from a distance and show the galaxy that the Geo were still the dominant military force. Honor demanded nothing less, but before his plans could advance, the Zur High Council summoned him and relieved him of command. They had seen the casualty reports and the tactical analysis and recognized that Krax's pride would lead to more defeats. The Dominion needed time to develop new strategies before engaging humans again. Ambassador Quiver of the Renti Federation sent a private message to President Chun congratulating her on the speech. The two had developed a friendship during the diplomatic process, and Kovar understood humans better than most aliens. "You walked the line perfectly between strength and peace," the message said. The galaxy heard both messages. In the frontier regions of space, where law was flexible and violence was common, the advisory had immediate practical effects. Pirate crews stopped targeting human vessels after 3 separate pirate attacks ended with the pirates dead or captured. Smugglers learned to negotiate with human captains rather than trying to board and search their ships. And mercenary companies added surcharges for any contract that involved human vessels. The Mechanus Collective, beings of pure logic and synthetic bodies, approached the United Earth government with a proposal for joint operations. They wanted to crew mixed-species vessels where Mechanus personnel handled external threats and human personnel handled internal security. The combination would make ships nearly invulnerable to both types of attack. Human merchant captains found themselves in high demand across council space. Companies wanted human security officers on their vessels, because everyone knew that no pirate or hostile force would dare board a ship with humans defending it. Employment opportunities for former military personnel expanded dramatically, but not all the consequences were positive. Some species began avoiding human ships entirely out of fear rather than respect. Trade with certain sectors declined as merchants worried about misunderstandings leading to violence. Xenophobic groups on various worlds used the advisory as evidence that humans were inherently dangerous. On a frontier station called Crossroads, a meeting took place that would become legendary in spacer circles. A human merchant captain named Sarah Brooks sat in a bar sharing drinks with a young Krillian officer fresh from the military academy. The Krillian asked the question that everyone wanted to know. "Why are you humans so effective at fighting on ships?" The officer asked with genuine curiosity. "I studied your history and your biology, but I still do not fully understand what makes you different." Captain Brooks thought for a long moment before answering. She had fought in 2 boarding actions during her career and remembered every detail. "It's not that we are good at fighting on ships," she finally said. It's that every human ship is a little piece of Earth. We carry our world with us when we travel. Humans spend our entire existence defending our territory, Brooks continued. Our homes and our land and our families. We did it against predators and invaders and natural disasters. Defending territory is what we do. It's what we have always done. When you board our ships, you are not just attacking a vessel, the captain explained. You are invading our home, and humans have never been good at letting invaders leave alive. We fight harder when defending than when attacking because home is worth fighting for. The Krillian officer nodded slowly as understanding dawned. So the warning is not about combat ability. It is about psychology. You fight differently when defending your territory. Exactly, Brooks confirmed. Put a human on a neutral battlefield, and we are just another species with strengths and weaknesses. But put us on our own ship defending our people and our home, and you trigger millions of years of evolution that says this is where you make your stand. The conversation spread through spacer networks and became part of the unofficial education about humans.